Morning, everybody. When my wife Debs and I were backpacking around Thailand, we spent about 3 or 4 days trekking up in the kind of the foothills of the Himalayas, and we had a local guide with us called Noom. And Noom was a fantastic guy. He had like a wicker basket on his back, and we'd set off walking, and we'd walk for about 6-8 hours a day. And as we were walking, suddenly you'd find Noom would just like bend down, pick up some mushrooms, stick it in his backpack, walk on, get to a bush, break off some branches, stick it in his backpack. As we carried on walking, found some berries on a bush, broke them off, put them in his backpack. When we got to the place where we were staying for that night, he was cooking a meal, and he was pulling out of his backpack the things he'd collected on the way, and he was using those in the meal that we had. Local knowledge, very important. I would never have done that. I would have killed us all. But there was a bunch of us trekking, and every night we got to like a little remote village, and we had some rice and we had some vegetables. And we did this for about 4 nights, and it was good, but it was just like rice and vegetables after trekking 8 hours a day. So when we got back into Chiang Mai, into the town that we were closest to, I ordered 2 chicken pad thais just for me. It's like I was so hungry. I was so hungry after trekking for 4 days. And man, food never tasted so good as when you were hungry, right? When you're really hungry, food tastes really good. Or I don't know if you've maybe done a very long shift at work and not been able to get a drink, or if you've been kind of hiking and your water bottles run out, and you get that first chance to take a swig of something when you're really thirsty. It's like that's the best drink in the world, right? When you're thirsty, water is so important, and when you're hungry, food is so important. And we're going to be looking today at the book of Exodus about the journey of God's people as they're kind of wandering in the wilderness, in the semi-arid deserts. And we're going to be looking at how Jesus was their spiritual drink and their spiritual food as they wandered through this barren wilderness. And this journey went on through the book of Exodus, into Leviticus, into Numbers, into Deuteronomy. So for the next kind of 4 weeks, God's people are stuck in the kind of the wilderness, the desert. And we're going to see this morning how Jesus was their spiritual food and their spiritual drink on that journey. When you're thirsty, when you're hungry, man, food and drink are never taste as good, never so important than when you're seeking it. And we're going to talk this morning a little bit about Jesus the Rock. But when I say the Rock, I don't mean this guy. I mean, he's a fine specimen of a human being, right? He's got muscles on muscles. But when I'm talking about the rock, we need to be thinking this. If we can have the slide. Jesus the Rock, sometimes translated mountain. I don't know if you can see, just for context, just down in this tiny little corner here, some single-story dwellings. Just tiny bits here. I mean, Jesus the Rock, right? When we read rock, I mean, in kiddies' Bible stories, it's kind of like a little pebbly boulder thing down here, right? Jesus the Rock. We're going to be looking at Jesus the Rock. And as God's people started walking out into this journey, they'd experienced miraculous provision of God. The story that probably most of us are familiar with like Moses and the Prince of Egypt, if you've seen that Disney movie. God set his people free. They part the Red Sea. They track through. And suddenly they're in the wilderness for like 40 years. And it's like, our lives are like that sometimes, right? We have seasons of our life where God is like miracle, 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 closeness, and we feel him. But there are seasons when we think, hang on, we're just wandering around here. God, where are you? God, it doesn't feel like you're doing the things that you used to do, God. What is that? Where are you? And our lives can be in a season of kind of like wilderness. But we're going to find out this morning, even in the wilderness, God is with us. Jesus, the Son, is there with us in all our seasons of life. It's good news. And Exodus, I just want us to know, kind of Exodus, the book, works a little bit like this. If we can have the slide, please. Just so you've got kind of like an overview of what the book does if you've not read it recently. The first bit is the bit that probably most of us know reasonably well. It's set up really as God of the people of Israel, against Pharaoh. Chapter 1, we get introduced to Pharaoh. He's powerful, but he's afraid of the fruitful and multiplying people of God in his land. They were fruitful and multiplying because that was God's blessing to them right from the Garden of Eden. And Pharaoh was so scared, he said, kill all the boys. Kill all the boys. First thing he does, he says to the midwives, if you get to the boys, kill them when they're born. The midwives feared God rather than fearing Pharaoh. So instead he went to his people, interestingly in the translation, went to his people and said, chuck all the boys in the Nile. Killed all the boys because he didn't want them growing up to be soldiers in an army. That was Pharaoh. We got introduced to him. And then God's response to Pharaoh was to introduce us to a human representative. We get introduced to Moses. Moses, who gets put in a tiny little mini ark and placed on the waters, this little basket, and brought up out of the waters, and God commissions him at the burning bush, if you know that story, God meeting Moses at the burning bush, given authority to represent God, his rule and his reign. We've seen that before in Genesis chapter 1. A human representative put on the earth to rule and to reign on God's behalf. We see it in Moses. And Moses was to go and stand before the human powerhouse that was Pharaoh and say, hey, Pharaoh, this is the message from God. These are my people, all of them, particularly these males that you're killing, these male babies. These whole people are like my firstborn son. They're like my precious ones, my chosen ones. We're chosen, Wendy's prayer this morning. We're precious to him. Cedric, we're God's masterpiece. We're precious, his chosen, special ones. And you're trying to destroy them, Pharaoh. But their blood cries out to me from the ground. Just like in Genesis, we read about Cain and Abel, and Abel's blood crying out from the ground. The blood of these male babies was crying out, and God had to act. So he sends Moses to Pharaoh, let my people go. And Pharaoh says, I don't know this God. And then what you have is kind of like the pitched battle between God and Pharaoh, kind of what we know is like the 10 plagues. It's like it's God against Pharaoh and kind of the gods of Egypt. And God rescues them out of slavery because God is more powerful than even the most powerful human being on the planet. And then we get the Passover, the kind of the last plague, the killing of the firstborns, as opposed to the killing of all the males. Killing of the firstborn males, as opposed to all the males, which is Pharaoh's thing. God's justice demanded a response to Pharaoh's atrocities, but we read, God offered a way of justice, but with mercy. So the firstborn sons in the houses, there could be offered a lamb sacrificed instead of the firstborn. And what's fascinating is that opportunity and that offer of mercy was open to all the Egyptians as well. If you read the scripture, it says, all the people of God can do this, and any alien or resident among you can also be included. God's mercy was also for the Egyptians, because God's plan was always for the nations of the world. That's what we read about. And as we track through, so that's the first bit of Exodus. Then there's a little hinge kind of poem in chapter 15, which is Moses singing about all the good stuff God has done. I mean, God did amazing stuff. And then halfway through the poem, he turns and says, and now God is going to do amazing stuff for us in the future. Because God has done amazing stuff for us in the past, he's going to do amazing stuff for us in the future, because God is the same yesterday, today, and forever. And what God has done in the past, he can do in the future. And it's important. That's why testimony is important. And that's why our stories are important, our journey is important, because we know what God is like. Because he's been good to us and faithful to us and provides for us. And therefore we know he will be like that in the future as well. And that's Exodus chapter 15. And then from kind of halfway through Exodus 15 onwards, you get Moses going up to meet God at Mount Sinai and the giving of the 10 Commandments. Most of us will be familiar with the 10 Commandments. And then plus 42 other commandments. Most of us will probably be less familiar with the other 42 commandments. But it's described as like almost like a marriage ceremony, a covenant ceremony, a bringing together of two parties in a covenant. And they have a meal up on the mountain together. Moses and the elders of Israel, they go up and have a meal with God on Mount Sinai. And it's described in this kind of legal covenantal term. That's what's going on in the middle part of Exodus. I wish I had time to tell you more, but I haven't. So, and then most of us will be familiar with the 10 Commandments. And then we get into a bit that's almost half the book, and most of us probably know this bit least well. This is a bit that is just detail and detail and detail about setting up the tabernacle. If you can think of it this way, they've just had a marriage ceremony, God and his people on Mount Sinai, and this is now newly married setting up home together. This is why it's so important. It's the place where God and his people and God meet together and dwell together and commune together. It's like, I went up Sam and Anwin's new house recently. Do you know what I mean? Just people care about their new house, care about living together, care about the arrangement. That's what God is doing in the second half of Exodus. And buried in the detail, buried in the, bring 13 shekels of this and make this and overlay this with gold and blah, blah. Do you know what I mean? In all those details, don't get bogged down in the details, but in Exodus 30, you read this. Gold everywhere. Bring gold, bring gold, bring gold, overlay it. Hey, tell you what you should do. Bring some frankincense to offer incense up to God. And tell you what you should do is bring some myrrh and put it in the anointing oil. And in one chapter, you get gold and frankincense and myrrh. And I think, I've heard that before. Like, why did the wise men bring gold, frankincense, and myrrh? Because Jesus was the place where God meets man, just like the tabernacle was the place where God meets man. Exodus chapter 30, all in one chapter. Jesus is there. It's amazing. I haven't got time to go into all of that. But we are going to take a little deep dive today, just into one aspect of the Exodus narratives, where we find Jesus out of so many. I could have chosen any of 100 places where Jesus is found in Exodus. It's so good. But we're here at the book of Exodus, second book of the Torah, second book of our journey through the 39 journeys to Jesus. So let's get our Bibles out. If you've got your Bibles, we're heading to Exodus, so can everybody please turn to 1 Corinthians chapter 10. Yeah, I'm not joking. Seems a bit weird, right? 1 Corinthians chapter 10. Paul's description of the book of Exodus. For I do not want you to be ignorant of the fact, brothers and sisters, that our ancestors were all under the cloud, and that they all passed through the sea, and they were all baptized into Moses in the cloud and in the sea. They all ate the same spiritual food and drank the same spiritual drink, for they drank from the spiritual rock that accompanied them. And that rock was Christ. That rock was Christ. Okay, let's have the next slide. Here we go. First bit of that, for I don't want you to be ignorant. Our ancestors were under the cloud, which almost seems quite like a bad thing. It's like, I'm a bit under the weather today. I'm a bit under the cloud. Until you read Exodus and realize the cloud was God's direction and purpose. God's cloud went ahead of them, directed them. God's cloud went behind them and protected them from the Egyptian soldiers and the chariots that were chasing them. So under the cloud is a good thing, not a bad thing. God's people were under the cloud of God's protection. And this is what it says in Exodus 13. This is a little bit. By the day, the Lord went ahead of them in a pillar of cloud to guide them on their way, and by night, a pillar of fire to give them light, so they could travel both day and night. Around that chapter 13, 14, 15, you find a lot about the cloud and what it was like. Okay, next slide. Thank you. And they all passed through the sea. Well, most of us will know this from the Disney movie, if nothing else. Exodus 14, Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and that night the Lord drove the sea back with a strong east ruach. Wind, breath, spirit. That word. That's that Hebrew word. We see that in Genesis chapter 1. And it turned into dry land. We see God separating waters and bringing dry land in Genesis chapter 1 as well. The waters were divided, and the Israelites went through. They passed through the sea on dry ground with a wall of water on their left and a wall of water on their right. Next slide, please. They all ate the same spiritual food. Exodus 16. Most of us, again, will probably have heard of manna, bread from heaven. Most of us in Wales will have sung it at a rugby game. Bread of heaven, feed me till I want no more. Feed me till I want no more. Exodus. The book of Exodus. We sing at every rugby match that Wales gets to. It's amazing. Exodus 16, right in the middle of Exodus. Oh, back one, thank you. I will rain down bread from heaven for you, and the people to go out each day and gather enough for that day. Okay, next slide. And they drank the same spiritual drink, for they drank from the spiritual rock that accompanied them. And here's Exodus 17. We'll get back to Exodus 17, so you can kind of open that up in your Bibles if you want to get there. The Lord said to Moses, go stand in front of the people, take with you some of the elders of Israel, take in your hand the staff which you struck the Nile, did all those miracles, and go. I will stand there before you on the rock at Horeb. Horeb's another name for Sinai, so Horeb and Sinai used interchangeably. If you're in the NIV, I think it says, I will stand before you by or beside the rock. I think that's a bad translation. I think it's on the rock. Hebrew is on. I'm going to go and stand on the rock in front of you. And so Moses did this in the sight of the elders of Israel, and he called the place Massah and Meribah because the Israelites quarreled and because they tested the Lord, saying, is the Lord among us or not? Let's have the next slide, please. I had to get my little kiddie Sunday school version of Moses hitting a rock out of my head. Because I had Moses go into like a little thing on the ground. Not Dwayne the Johnson, but the rock. Moses with his staff hit the rock, struck the rock. And now I've read it and dug in, I've got visions of like a rumbling and a waterfall cascading out. Do you know how many people left Egypt? 600,000 men, fighting age men, plus the women, plus the children, plus some translations called it a mixed crowd, a bunch of others. They reckon maybe 2 million plus people. I mean, a little puddle of water is not going to be enough for 2 million people, right? I mean, rushing, gushing, powerful waterfall of water, kind of satisfying 2 million people's worth of thirst. Let's have the next slide. That rock that was struck was Christ. And if we can have the next slide, that's Mount Sinai. Struck the rock and waters poured forth from it. Remember how big that is? It's where the people camped around the plain just in front of that. Jesus was the rock. And 1,500 years later, Paul was able to see Jesus and understand Jesus was there. And most of Jesus' early followers were part of that Jewish tradition and at least were culturally aware of the Old Testament scrolls that we will be journeying through and were familiar with the rock language in the Old Testament, the kind of the metaphor as God as rock. So I just want to run through them quickly. Psalm 18, we find one. Psalm 18, I love you, Lord, my strength. We've been singing about that this morning. The Lord is my rock, my fortress, my deliverer. My God is my rock in whom I take refuge. My shield, my horn of my salvation, my stronghold. I call to the Lord who is worthy of praise, and I've been saved from my enemies. The rock is a place of protection. The protection of God as a shield, a refuge, a fortress. This is a big rock. This isn't a small rock. So if you are in need this morning of some sense of security, if you're facing enemies and you need a place of refuge and rest, Jesus is your rock this morning. You can run to him and find a safe place to rest and be at peace because Jesus is that rock. Isaiah 30. We'll get to this down the track this year. And you will sing as on the night you celebrate a holy festival, and your hearts will rejoice, as when the people play in the pipes, maybe bagpipes, I don't know. When the people playing the pipes go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the rock of Israel. The rock was associated with like the mountain of God. Sometimes rock and mountain get used interchangeably. It's the place where the presence of God is with his people, where he brings joy and satisfies them. Jesus is a place of deep connection between us and God. If you are feeling overwhelmed or a bit sad or depressed and feel like you've lost your joy, Jesus can satisfy you no matter what your outside circumstances are and bring you an abiding sense of contentment and well-being that bubbles and springs up into joy on the inside no matter what's going on your outside. Jesus is the rock of God's presence with us. Let's have a look at Deuteronomy. Get here in a few weeks. Deuteronomy 32. Jeshurun, which is kind of like, it's a bit of a play on words. It kind of means righteous one, but ironically. So it's used to negatively of Israel when they should be righteous, but they're not. So it's like a little ironic play on words in the Hebrew. So Jeshurun, read Israel, grew fat and kicked, filled with food. They became heavy and sleek. They abandoned the God who made them and rejected the rock, their savior. They made him jealous with their foreign gods and angered him with their detestable idols. Skip down a few verses. You deserted the rock who fathered you. You forgot the God who gave you birth. So rock is also like creator, life-giving, almost like eternal, ageless, timeless. This, not tiny rock, the rocks, they've always been there. I think that's the metaphor, that's the language that's being used here. The rocks that existed way before me and my family got here, they were there. And they'll carry on being there way after I've left this earth. I think that's the kind of the picture that you're meant to get out, this sense of the rock. The rock is timeless, the God of the ages. It's solid, like bedrock beneath your feet. It doesn't shift, it doesn't move, it doesn't change. And if in your life you feel like things are shifting and moving, or moving too fast or moving the way you don't want them to, you perhaps need a new creative input from Creator God, the rock, who made you, who birthed you. He's like the rock beneath our feet. He doesn't change, he doesn't shift, he doesn't move. He is Jesus. And because the people in Jesus' day and Paul's day were familiar with the rock language, it's no surprise that when Jesus starts talking, one of the first things he does is what we read in our Gospel of Matthew, chapter 5 to 7, we call it the Sermon on the Mount. If you read that, perhaps the Sermon on the Rock. Mountain, rock, used interchangeably here. It's no surprise in the New Testament, Jesus gets associated with this rock. So Matthew 5 to 7 is kind of Jesus saying, you've heard it say, i.e. the Old Testament law. But I tell you, you've heard ABC, but I tell you X, Y, Z. That's what Jesus was doing on a rock. He was like Moses went up a rock, met God and got the 10 Commandments on tablets of stone. But I tell you, here's my law. We're on a mountain. We're on a rock. Let me tell you, underneath those written laws is the heart and the wisdom and the beauty of God. Let me tell you what that is like. And that's Jesus giving his version of Moses' kind of 10 Commandments. And then we read this in Matthew 7 right at the end, the wise and foolish builders. Again, many of us will know this. If you hear these words of mine, Jesus says, and put them into practice, you're like a wise man who built his house on the rock. This rock. Build your life on this rock. Build your life on this understanding, this teaching. Build your life on me, Jesus was saying. In Matthew 16, most of us, again, will kind of know the passage where Jesus turns to his disciples and says, people are saying all types of crazy things about me. Who do you say I am? So Jesus came to the region of Caesarea Philippi, and he asked his disciples, who do the people say the Son of Man is? They replied, some say John the Baptist, some say Elijah, others say Jeremiah or one of the prophets. But what about you? Jesus turned to them and asked, doesn't matter what, ignore the noise. What does Jesus mean for you? He asked. Peter said, you're the Messiah, the promised one, the anointed one, the Son of the living God. Next slide, please. And Jesus replied, blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for this was not revealed to you by flesh and blood, but this was a spiritual revelation from my Father in heaven. And because of that, I tell you, you are Peter, Petros. And on this rock, Petra, I will build my church. You're Petros, and on this Petra, I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not overcome it. We have this saying in English, a chip off the old block. You know that phrase? That's a masonry phrase, chip off the old block. It's what Jesus was saying here. Peter, you're a chip off the old block. That confession, that is like a little chip off the truth about who God is. You've discovered something about the truth of who God is. You're Petros from the Petra. that revelation about and confession of Jesus as the Son of God, the Anointed One, the Son of Man, that is the rock, Peter. That confession is the mountain that will fill the whole earth. We read about in Daniel chapter 2. Daniel chapter 2, a little boulder falls and overtakes all the other kingdoms of the earth and becomes a mountain that fills the earth gloriously. Peter's confession and my confession and Jesus' followers' confession down through the ages is Jesus is our place of strength and security. He's the source of our refuge. He's a place of joy and relational intimacy with God. Jesus is the ageless, timeless one, eternal God of the ages. And Apostle Paul says this, Ephesians chapter 2 a little bit later on said, that rock is the cornerstone, the chief cornerstone, the one that everything should be built off, everything should be built upon. That confession of who Jesus is, that fills the entire earth. Jesus the rock, the protection of God for you. Jesus the rock, the presence of God for you. And in Exodus, we'll just turn as we finish to show Jesus the rock as a place of provision for you. So we've been journeying and wandering and meandering, and now we're landing in Exodus. So if you have got your Bibles, Exodus chapter 17, please. So it took us a while, like the people of God, but we got there in the end. Exodus 17, and we will start at verse 3. But the people were thirsty for water there. They grumbled against Moses and said, "Why did you bring us out of Egypt to make us and our children and our livestock die of thirst?" Moses cried out to the Lord, "What am I going to do with these people? They're ready to stone me." And the Lord answered Moses, "Go in front of the people, take some of the elders of Israel with you. Take the staff in your hand which you struck the Nile and go. I will stand there before you on the rock at Horeb." And this is why on is so important. Strike the rock, and water will come out of it for the people to drink. So Moses did this in the sight of the elders of Israel and called the place Massah and Meribah, because the Israelites quarreled because they tested the Lord, saying, "Is the Lord among us or not?" It's a question I find myself asking from time to time in my life. It's like, actually, is the Lord with me or not? In those seasons of doubt, in those days of darkness, you think, is the Lord with me? Is the Lord among me or not? Is Jesus in me or not? And I don't want, if we face that question, what I don't want us to do is do what the people of God did here and look in the wrong place. They were looking for natural water from a natural water source in the middle of a desert. They were looking in the wrong place. When you're in that season, the solution isn't earthly reality. The solution is heavenly reality, spiritual reality. The resources are heavenly ones, not natural ones. They were looking for a natural source of water, but God provides supernaturally for them. He says this, "Hey, Moses, take that wood, strike that rock, water everywhere. See what pours out. See what pours out, Moses, when you strike me." And that gave me something to think about. It was like, what happens when people strike at me? When I'm in a tight spot or a tough spot, or face circumstances that come against me unexpectedly that I wasn't anticipating, what comes out of me when people attack me? I mean, it's so bad because even when I'm like tired or stressed, I get a bit snappy, get a bit angry, get a bit short with people. And so if I've done that to you, which undoubtedly I will have done, I apologize. I need to be better than that. Is the Lord in here or not? Is the Lord inside me or not? When you strike me, what comes out? I mean, does Galatians 5 set this up for us, really? Does love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, gentleness, goodness, faithfulness, self-control, does that come out of me when I'm struck? Or the other bit of Galatians 5, or jealousy, outbursts of anger, selfish ambition, causing faction, does that come out of me when I'm struck and in a tough place? What comes out of me? When they hit Jesus on the cross, they took a wooden spear and put it in his side, and out poured blood, forgiveness, and water. John's gospel says, provision. What comes out of you when you are in those tight spots? It's a challenge, right? I want Jesus to come out of me. I want good stuff to come out of me. I want his life to pour out of me. Not what I've got to give. Not great, but what he gives is amazing. Let's have a look at the next slide, please. So in all these things, this amazes me. On the last and greatest day of the festival or the feast, this was the feast of booths or tabernacles or shelters. This was the festival that God's people left their homes and went into tents, a bit like our One Voice camping. They did that so they could remember the Exodus, remember wandering in the wilderness. This was an annual festival where they remembered God by going out and living in tents. It was their way of remembering this Exodus story. And on the last and greatest and the culminating day of that feast, Jesus stood up and said in a loud voice, "Is anyone thirsty?" Because they were just remembering their years of wandering in the desert. "If anyone's thirsty, come to me and drink. Whoever believes in me," Jesus said, as scriptures have said, "rivers of living water will flow out of them." If anyone's thirsty, that's what we read. God's people were thirsty. It says they thirsted, but they went looking in the wrong place. They went looking for natural resources rather than spiritual resources. Jesus is our spiritual drink from the spiritual rock. Most of us will know Jesus and the Samaritan woman at the well, where he says, if you come to me and drink from me, not like this water that's going to run out, but it will bubble up in you and become streams that will never run out. It's amazing. We find it in Exodus, like 15, 16, 17, Exodus. Jesus is there. Supernatural, spiritual, never running out. Life source to us and his people. And we've kind of had a bit of a deep dive in as much detail as we can in 25 minutes. But that's Exodus 17, Jesus' spiritual drink. If we back up one chapter, we get Exodus 16, which is the manna, the bread from heaven. So in two chapters, right next to each other, we won't go into it, but what you get is Jesus saying, "I'm the bread from heaven." Jesus says, "John, I am the bread." You get Jesus saying, "I'm your nourishment. I'm your sustenance. I'm the thing that keeps you going." The kind of the bread analogies and metaphors. We haven't gone there this morning. And then the next chapter, "But I'm like water to you as well. I'm like I keep you alive. I'm the thing that gets in you and keeps you alive and keeps you going." Jesus is that to us. He's both those things to us in equal measure. Our manna from heaven and our spiritual drink that keeps us alive. And the great thing is this, in Exodus 16, verse 16, you can read it up here. I love this verse. God told his people, "Hey, go out, take as much as you need. Just enough as you need for you. You can't keep it and store it, and it turns rotten if you do that. But whatever you need, there's enough for you. Whatever you need to gather," and it says whether it's a little or a lot, "there's enough for you." And if 2 million people had wanted to gather a lot, there would have been enough for them. Would have been enough for them. Because Jesus is enough. For all. Forever. For every circumstance that you are facing, Jesus is enough. Where do we find Jesus in the book of Exodus? Well, we find him in the eating and the drinking. He's our life-sustaining power and our nourishment for our bones. And we're going to encounter him this morning in food and drink. Bread, in this case, wine, cranberry juice. But he has extravagantly enough, more than enough, for everybody here today. Whatever you need Jesus to be for you this morning, if you need him to be your place of protection, your place of refuge, he is here for you. If you need him to be a place of intimacy and reconnection of your relationship with you and God, he's here for you this morning. And if you just need his provision miraculous, supernatural provision. He's here for us this morning. He is eternal, without limits, God, and he's worthy of our worship.